very big possibility.
A very big possibility
Yes,
that the
yes.
Russians will invade.
Yes, yes.
Date 2004. Target Ukraine. Objective election rigging. Origins of this order. From the highest levels of the Kremlin. Since the Soviet Union broke down and Ukraine became independent in 1991, the Kremlin, also known as the Russian government, have been doing everything in its power to re-establish the Great Russian Empire. Georgia, Armenia, Lithuania, Ukraine, and 11 other countries have made up the Soviet Union. But Ukraine was their number one target. With Ukraine on their side, Russia had a shot at reclaiming its glory days. But after years of failed negotiations, Russia realized that the only way they were going to make progress was to get a little dirty. So in 2004, Russia's goal was to get a pro-Russian president elected in Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, instead of the pro-Ukrainian candidate, Viktor Yushchenko. Yes, both candidates were named Viktor. To make sure the pro-Russian candidate won, Russia turned to election rigging. But that wasn't all. There was an assassination attempt on the pro-Ukrainian candidate, Yushchenko, and then the pro-Ukrainian candidate Yushchenko was poisoned with dangerous amounts of TCDD, the most potent dioxin, and a contaminant in Agent Orange.
For Ukraine's presidency transformed in a matter of a few weeks this fall into a gravely ill man. His face almost overnight changed into a scarred, bloated mask.
Doctors found dioxin levels in his blood 6,000 times above normal. Although it's not clear if the men responsible were acting on behalf of Russia, one of the men accused of the poisoning fled to Russia and was immediately granted citizenship, protecting him from extradition. And the election rigging worked. Pro-Russian candidate Viktor Yanukovych was announced the winner. Unfortunately, the rigging had worked a little too well. It was a little bit too obvious, sparking the Orange Revolution.
Hundreds of thousands of pro-democracy Ukrainians in the streets today protested against the results of the presidential election.
When votes were counted again, it turned out that pro-Russian Yanukovych had actually lost. But that didn't discourage Russia, because just 6 years later, they actually got Yanukovych elected for real. And for 3 sweet years, Russia had an obedient Ukrainian puppet to boss around, until another uprising in 2013 kicked Yanukovych out, again. Panicked, Vladimir Putin held an all-night meeting, concluding that, quote, "We must start working on returning Crimea to Russia," end quote. Crimea is a peninsula on the Black Sea that was a part of Ukraine at the time. It's not only an important economic powerhouse for Ukraine, but also serves as the military base to control the Black Sea from. So on the 23rd of February, pro-Russian protesters held demonstrations in the Crimean city of Sevastopol. 5 days later, unmarked Russian Special Forces troops invaded the streets of Sevastopol, occupying the airports and forcefully took over the parliament of Crimea. A pro-Russian government was installed, and within just a few weeks, Crimea was declared independent from Ukraine. This would be kinda like if America invaded something like the Panama Canal and declared it a separate country from Panama. Today, 8 years after the annexation of Crimea, Russia and Ukraine are again at another crossroads. Russia has deployed over 100,000 troops along its border with Ukraine, and fears of a Russian invasion are higher than ever.
Russians have sent saboteurs into Ukraine.
No progress on the de-escalation of that massive buildup of 100,000 troops on Ukraine's borders, Judy.
But the question is, why? Putin has an unimaginable amount of wealth. People like Putin have wealth managers who invest their wealth for them. Plebs like us don't have that pleasure. That was until Wealthfront came around. Wealthfront is an investment service and app that allows regular people to start building long-term wealth by creating a diverse investment portfolio of low-cost ETFs. And Wealthfront is super simple to use, so you don't have to be an investment expert to get started. All you need to do is click the link below, sign up, answer a few questions to determine your goals, and deposit as little as $500 to get started. Wealthfront then creates a personalized portfolio designed to minimize your risk and maximize your returns in a long-term way that's way safer than something like day trading. Plus, the app is super easy to use. Here's a quick product demo that Wealthfront put together so you can see what their clients are experiencing. Wealthfront already manages over $28 billion for more than 450,000 clients. It's been voted the best robo-advisor by both Investopedia in 2020 and NerdWallet in 2019. What's nice about Wealthfront is that they're one of the few companies who actually disclose their annual returns. So if you go to their website, you can see that the return on a taxable portfolio with a risk score of 8, so more on the aggressive side, currently has a 1-year return of 16.44%. But of course, past performance isn't indicative of future performance. So if you're interested in building a diverse investment portfolio with opportunities to build long-term wealth, all you need to do is head to invest.wealthfront.com/Jake and get started with just $500. Plus, for up to $5,000, you get free investment management for life. So pause the video and head to invest.wealthfront.com/Jake to sign up today. Thanks to Wealthfront for sponsoring this video. The history of Ukraine is one of suffering. Before Ukraine was Ukraine, it went by a lot of different names and was ruled by a lot of different people, often at the same time. This is going to be extremely simplified. Eventually, all these different empires disappeared and left behind a massive power vacuum in the region that would later be known as Ukraine. While Ukraine's powerful neighbors argued over who should take control of the region, thousands of Russian slaves called serfs fled from their masters and into Crimea. This led to bigger disagreements between the powers that wanted to control Ukraine, and what resulted was the Northern Wars. Russia took a lot of land during that war, including a huge part of Ukraine. This didn't sit well with the people living in Ukraine, so they tried to get their independence quite a few times. But then in 1922, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was created, and Ukraine officially became part of the Russian Empire. Not only was Ukraine important as an industrial and agricultural center, but it had direct access to the Black Sea, from which Russia wanted to build a huge navy to compete with Britain and America. Then came Stalin. Under his communist programs, Ukrainians were forced to farm and meet crazy production quotas before getting any of the food themselves. Millions of Ukrainians starved to death in what is known as the Great Famine.
As many as 10 million Ukrainians starved to death in 1932 and 1933 thanks to Stalin's agricultural policies, which were not just stupid, but also actively evil. I mean, there was widespread starvation in a country that is now the world's 3rd largest exporter of grain.
And when World War II came along, things only got worse. The Germans tried to invade the Soviet Union, killing hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers, and when the war finally ended, things didn't get much better. Stalin decided that Ukraine wasn't quite Russian enough and moved a ton of Russians into Crimea.
Then, following World War II, Stalin forcibly deported the Crimean Peninsula's entire indigenous population of ethnic Tatars to Central Asia. So if you want to point to one individual who's responsible for a lot of this, I don't want to, call anyone out, but Stalin.
When Stalin eventually died, it was safe to say that the people of Ukraine and Russia weren't exactly friends. The new leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, tried to change that, but it didn't go as planned. And over the next few decades, all Ukraine wanted was to get out from under Russia's thumb. And their chance finally came in 1991. Ukraine had been one of the founding nations of the Soviet Union, and after Russia, it was the most powerful and populated republic of the Soviet Union. But Ukraine was also done being used as a pawn for Russia's political games. So in 1990, as the Soviet Union was slowly losing control of its empire, 300,000 Ukrainians participated in a peaceful demonstration calling for independence. People wanted freedom from the Soviet Union, but it wasn't going to be that easy. In August 1991, the leaders of the Soviet Union tried to remove their boss Mikhail Gorbachev and put a more pro-Soviet guy in charge. Their plan eventually failed, and it was this sort of meddling and instability that gave Ukraine the final push to declare independence. On December 1st, 1991, Ukraine held a vote, where a whopping 90% of its citizens were in favor of independence. They elected their first ever president of Ukraine, and the country finally had the freedom it was looking for. The only problem was, by declaring independence, it had earned itself a very bitter, vengeful neighbor. Just imagine if Texas, the biggest state in the United States, seceded from the United States. It would be the ultimate slap in the face, the ultimate symbol of a failed nation that its very own state thought that they would be better off fending for themselves. So Russia wasn't going to stand by and watch one of its most important territories sail off into the sunsets. If Russia was ever going to return to its glory days, it starts with their former satellite states, with Ukraine being the #1 target. Right off the bat, Russia got involved in its newly liberated neighbor's politics. This led to the rigged election of 2004 that we talked about earlier, and although Ukraine won that battle, it was far from over. Because in 2010, that same pro-Russian candidate, Viktor Yanukovych, ran for president again. He spent more than $100 million on his campaign, and this time he actually won. Or at least no one can prove that he cheated. For 3 glorious years, Russia felt like it controlled Ukraine again. President Yanukovych distanced Ukraine from Western Europe and NATO, he listened to what the Kremlin said, and things were pretty great for what was left of the Russian Empire. Until the people got tired of being led by a Russian pawn again, and launched another revolution. In November 2013, massive protests broke out again after President Yanukovych refused to sign a political and economic deal with the EU. Everyone thought the protests would die down, but they only became more popular. By February 2014, they had turned violent and caused the death of 130 people, including 18 police officers. Something had to be done. So the Ukrainian government decided to hold early elections to appease the people. President Yanukovych bails. He fled the capital before anyone had the chance to impeach or overthrow him. Protesters took control of the parliaments and voted him out immediately. Russia had just lost its puppet to what they viewed as a violent and illegal coup. Russia immediately invades Crimea afterwards. Like we covered earlier, Crimea is home to a lot of Russians who got moved there by Stalin. So when the Russian military invaded, they used defending Russian civilians as an excuse. The annexation of Crimea started a bloody battle that killed thousands of people. And if you watch interviews with people living in Crimea today, you'll hear mixed feelings. Some support the Russian control, others oppose it. But just because the violence died down in Crimea today, doesn't mean it's not alive and well in other parts of Ukraine. Around the same time Russia invaded Crimea, Russian separatists on the eastern edge of Ukraine also started an uprising. They were trying to take the territory from Ukraine and rejoin Russia. War broke out between the Ukrainian soldiers and the separatists, and for almost a year it was a free-for-all. But then a ceasefire in 2015 froze both sides in their positions. What resulted was strange. A mix of modern-day combat where World War I style trench warfare. Trenches were dug to hide from snipers, drones, and artillery. Wind-up phones were used because they can't be bugged or wiretapped by the Russians. In some spots on the border, Russian and Ukrainian fighters were less than 50 meters away from each other, waiting for the other side to make a move. And over the next 7 years, over 14,000 Ukrainians will have been killed during this never-ending battle.
Well, I always thought that it's finished already, but now I can't see where this finish is, because it's continuous already 7 years, and I don't see where is it the end.
And now it looks like the real war might just about to begin.
If you take weapon to your hands, you're the target. That's all.
How would you describe your enemies? Who are they? Are they Russians? Are they separatists?
Русські. Та русські воєнні, ну, так як уже ми знаємо, чули. Да, Росія. Ну, так.
In April 2021, Russia deploys around 120,000 soldiers to the Ukrainian border. Panic spread through Ukraine and Europe. Everyone thought this was it. Russia was gonna invade. But then, just a few weeks later, all those 120,000 troops withdrew. The Kremlin said they were just participating in a readiness drill, and there was nothing to worry about. What was strange was that even though the Russian troops withdrew, they left behind all their heavy weapons and artillery. Was this Russia's way of subtly positioning its weapons for invasion? For now, the panic subsided. But then 8 months later in December 2021, Ukraine sounded the alarm again. All those 120,000 troops had returned. More than 12% of Russia's military were stationed at the very edge of Ukraine. And panic set in again. It seemed like Putin was making his move. Ukraine admits that it wouldn't be able to stop a full-blown invasion and calls for the US's help. That same month, the president of Ukraine claims his intelligence team has stopped a coup attempt by the Russians. The threat of invasion is so serious that even regular Ukrainian citizens are forming militias to protect their cities and neighborhoods.
My main job, I am a lawyer. We must be prepared to defend. If we fail our independence, we will disappear.
What made you decide to join the Territorial Defense Forces?
My will to defend my country against oppression, Russian oppression.
And it's not just the men. Women, young people, anyone who can carry a rifle are seeing it as their duty to prepare for an invasion.
I hope that these skills I won't use, but I want to be sure that I can.
And the worst part is, no one knows if Russia is serious. Ukraine is to Russia what Taiwan is to China, a tiny yet strategically important territory that represents the greatest insult to your legitimacy. It's a beacon to the people of Russia that almost the same demographic of people can thrive without being under the thumb of an authoritarian government. Whether or not Russia is willing to take Ukraine back with violence and risk World War III is yet to be seen, but one thing is for sure. After the US didn't retaliate out of a certain failed withdrawal out of a certain Middle Eastern country, the odds of Putin taking that chance has definitely increased.